What if you could impact the world at large when it comes to designing your legacy? I have the pleasure to introduce you to Marc Kramer this lovely morning. He is a serial entrepreneur, as well as a professor and a published author. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure, and you're joining us today, I believe, from the lovely country of Vietnam over in Asia regarding the time zone difference.
Yes, I'm in Hanoi, Vietnam. I'm a professor at Penn University.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your time this lovely day. So I thought I might start out with the basic question that everybody asks, which is tell us a little bit about your background and how you arrived today, given where you started.
Well, I actually started to be a career sports writer, and I did that for 5 years. And then I realized that it wasn't conducive to having a family, but I always had a knack for starting businesses to make side money. And I've been a serial entrepreneur, I hate to say it, for almost 40 years. I've started up 25 ventures. I've written like 200 business plans, have raised over $3 billion in capital for different ventures. I've written 6 books, all focused on entrepreneurship. I have a podcast focused on entrepreneurship called The Best Business Minds, where I interview business book authors. I started a new podcast called Asian Founders and Funders. So my whole life has been dedicated to working with entrepreneurs and starting my own ventures.
Yes, yes. Well, I just think it's so interesting. And one of the things you mentioned in the preamble before we started recording is that you had started one of the first angel networks. Would you speak about that for a moment?
Well, back in 1989, when I started Penn State's Technology Development Center back in the 80s, uh, all the companies I were working with were trying to access wealthy individuals to invest in their company. And unless you knew wealthy individuals, there were no formally organized groups to go to present your business plan. So I started the Pennsylvania Private Investors Group back in 1990. And back then, people thought that was crazy. They were wondering, why would wealthy people want to invest in startup companies with so much risk when they can invest in publicly traded companies? And I knew that investors want to take a certain amount of capital and risk it and get the next Microsoft or Apple at that time. And so they were willing to buy those lottery tickets. We just needed to connect them with the lottery ticket. And so I went around and asked wealthy people if they'd be interested. And I got a call by the governor to start a trade association for technology companies. And I ended up having 15 guys who ran publicly traded technology companies that they all started. And so I told those guys about my idea, and they embraced it right away. And that's how the first formally organized investor angel network got started. And I ended up on the cover of Profit magazine and featured in Inc. and other publications. But think about it now, almost 35 years later, now you have angel investor groups that you can send your business to all over the planet. But back in 1990, when I started the first one, nobody thought that that was a realistic possibility.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's so interesting because sometimes we don't realize the good decisions we make and then the ripple effects later on.
Yeah, I actually didn't start thinking about it until like in the past year. You know, you're so caught up in what you're doing. But then I realized that all of these angel groups, if I hadn't kicked off the first one, none of these would exist. I mean, for years, right? Nobody had ever started something like this before. And there were, of course, Rockefellers and Carnegies and other very wealthy people who were providing capital. And then there were also venture capitalists, and they were providing early stage and seed stage money, which they do very little of today. Now, all the money for these early stage companies comes from angel investors and groups of angels.
Yes. One of the things I thought that I might pivot to in our conversation today would be best practices, because when I think about entrepreneurship, it's, gosh, maybe a select, I don't want to say a select few make it through, but gosh, not everybody can work through their lunch hour. Not everybody sees the return on investment. So I thought I might start with some of the best practices. One of the things you mentioned is that you oftentimes, and one of the things that made you successful is that you would answer emails in blocks.
Yeah, so to manage your time, you have to be very disciplined to be an entrepreneur. and I hate to say this because everybody's worried about quality of life, but I typically work a 6 day week, and I'm typically working from like 7, 8 in the morning till 9 to 11 o'clock at night. So one of the things you need to do is not answer emails as they come in, but wait till a bunch have accumulated and then answer them. Let's say you spend an hour, 2 hours answering emails. And what I do is I send them, I store them up in my bin so I can see that I've gotten this done. And then I hit the send button. So I might see like I've put in 40, 50 emails ready to go. So I know that I've accomplished something, and I also make sure that I'm just not stopping and starting all day long answering emails because that's very distracting and you can't get things done. And the most important thing for an entrepreneur is to feel a sense that they're accomplishing something. And by not having a lot of meetings, which entrepreneurs hate meetings, uh, if you're focused and disciplined and you're organized, and organization's really important, and also filtering through things that you don't really need to do at the time. So I prioritize what I need to get done.
Yeah, I think that's an important insight to any of the listeners because it seems like more and more people are questioning corporate America or the corporate world, and they're going into what's known as the gig economy. And so then where are the skill sets if they're not necessarily mentored or if they don't learn them in university or college or school prior to that time? What are the things that they need to do so that they can see success? Because one of the things of designing a legacy is shifting out of survival mode and getting to that place of being able to thrive and not be
I
in the
mean,
fear part of the brain.
let's face it, and this has been going on for at least 30 years. You can no longer count on corporate America to birth you professionally and bury you professionally when your time is done. You're not going to go spend 30 years at any company. Now, the average person works for 10 to 15 companies during the course of their career. And frankly, people become entrepreneurs because they either have great ideas or they want more control of their professional and financial future, especially people who do consulting. And I've been doing consulting when I'm in between ventures my entire professional life. And I have to say that every morning when I wake up, I know no one can fire me. My clients can fire me, of course, but the idea is to get as many clients as you can. Or you're operating two or three ventures at a time. I mean, and recently there have been studies that have shown by Harvard and Wharton that you're better off running two, three ventures simultaneously than putting all your energy into one particular venture. But I think today, especially the younger generation, they want more flexibility in where they live. I know my daughter has a global communications company, and she can live anywhere. She lived in Sweden, now she lives in Los Angeles. When she visits family, she can operate anywhere she wants to. And I think that's become critical. And we've seen that during the pandemic, that a lot of people don't want to come back to an office. They want to work from wherever they are. And now they've also built into their schedule all the family things they have to do, from taking care of kids to taking care of elderly parents, or just making sure they have a better quality of life.
Yes. Well, it's just interesting how much things have changed. Absolutely. I think a generation or two ago, people would work for that company for their entire life and or their entire
Absolutely.
career and get that pension. Things are a little different today.
Yeah, well, I mean, corporate America has definitely changed. It's not paternalistic anymore. If they have a bad quarter, they let you go.
Right.
We've
Right.
seen Elon Musk let go of 80% of the Twitter workforce. And then when he told people he was going to keep them the next week, he changed his mind. How many of those people were offered jobs that they could have taken and then decide to stay with him only to be let go? And now they have no leverage with employers. So I think everybody is thinking today that they can only trust themselves and rather go back to a time when everybody pretty much worked for themselves as a blacksmith,
A
or a farmer,
tradesperson.
whatever they did.
Yes. Yes. Gosh, it's so interesting. I think that there is definitely still a need for talent, but absolutely, you're right. I think that there's a different dynamic regarding trust these days because somebody can become an influencer, they can publish a book. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes to have multiple opportunities on the table, it's always that opportunity that you think isn't going to be the one that blossoms is the one that does well.
Oh, oh, I mean, I could tell you story after story, but it's 100%. I mean, if you there was a book about Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg had four ideas when he was at Harvard, and he thought the one that had the least potential was Facebook, and that became the big home run. Bill Gates offered half of Microsoft for 500,000 to IBM, and the IBM people said it's all about hardware, not software. But what if they had done that, or what if Mark Zuckerberg had taken a different road? I mean, I think everything in life is unpredictable, and we have very little control over anything. The only thing we have control over is actually showing up and hoping that things fall right.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me bring up another, I think, is a good best practice that you have thought about, reflected on in your career that I think listeners could perhaps benefit from. Your evening ritual. You talked about knowing what works, even if that's escaping into a mystery novel and not allowing the stress to take over. So if you have to do yoga or meditation or exercise, especially when you think about high achievers who are super successful, would you speak more into your evening ritual? Because I think a lot of times how we go to sleep at night is how we are going to wake up in the morning regarding our mindset and our energy and our outlook.
For me, I have to read every night before I go to bed. I cannot go to sleep without taking the eraser through my brain and cleaning the chalkboard. So I'm reading biographies, mysteries, suspense novels, history, or even magazines. I have to read in order for me to go to bed. Unless I'm so exhausted, I cannot go to sleep without it. But it also allows me to sleep through the night. And I only sleep 5.5 hours a day. So
Wow.
that's all I need is 5.5 hours sleep. I wake up refreshed, ready to go, and I can work from roughly 6 in the morning till 12, 1 o'clock at night, 12 at night or 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to be able to not allow that work to consume your mind, your life, because some people
Yes.
it becomes their identity. So even this conversation around legacy, it's interesting. How can somebody's legacy be connected to their work, but not their complete identity?
Well, I mean, legacy takes on different forms, right? I mean, your legacy can be that you're a great parent and you backed up your kids and you helped them become the most they can be. And part of your legacy is that you decided that you would show them a way of supporting their them as children so they would support their kids. My father, his legacy for me was the fact that he was an amazing parent and gave me all the support I needed. When I became a sports writer at 15, he edited my stuff and took it into the editors. And I always remembered that. And when I had kids, and I have two daughters, I make sure that I give them 100% support. Whatever they need to do, I'm there for them. And some people's legacy is, how do you make a difference in the world? And so for me, it was starting this angel group. And now I've been teaching in Asia and I want to make a difference here. So I feel my whole life is focused on service, service to society. And I've had some successes in entrepreneurship, but not home runs. And I feel that my reason for being is to actually help other entrepreneurs. So started and run the Angel Venture Fair, which brings together one of the largest gatherings of angel investors and entrepreneurs in the country. And I do a lot of interviews with entrepreneurs, exposing them to investors. So I kind of think that's my legacy. But there's a variety of ways that you can have legacy. Even your show is your legacy. I mean, people are going to watch these interviews and they can watch them 100 years from now because they will not disappear because you'll put them on a YouTube channel or one of these that lasts forever. And I think that's great. And part of your legacy is that you're going to be educating people in a variety of ways that is going to impact them in a positive way.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for speaking into that. Yeah, I know that you have a podcast, and sometimes you never know who's listening out there, especially, let's say, in the BRICS nations, and that email shows up in the inbox, and you go, oh my gosh, somebody's listening out there.
I have to say, my podcast, when I started at the beginning of the pandemic. And I thought, how cool would it be to interview business book authors? And I had taught at Wharton for 10 years. I knew a colleague named Laura Hung, who had written a book called Edge, and she had moved to Harvard. And I said to her on a Thursday morning, hey, Laura, I want to start a podcast. Can I interview you? And she said, sure. When do you want to do it? I said, tomorrow at lunchtime. She goes, you mean like in 24 hours? I said, yes. So I
Carpe
said, I'll
diem.
just send her the blast email. And she said, well, maybe 25 people will show up, but 178 people showed up. And after that, people were asking me when's the next one. So I did 2 a week for the first 6 months, but then that became too much, reading 2 full books a week. So I did a book a week, but it's a live podcast. I didn't know they weren't even live. I assumed all podcasts were live, but that's rare that they're live. And then the authors told me, you know what? I love this podcast because you read the books, but it's a live show. I interact with the audience. So, now I've done over 200 shows. We have listeners in 75 countries. And we've won 6 awards. So I feel good. So I feel part of my legacy is this podcast, and the people will be able to learn about these authors and take the lessons from the authors and apply it to their professional future.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that you did a live audience. When I first started, I had to get used to public speaking, even if it's just in front of a laptop. It's it's a new skill set, like jumping out of an
Well, I mean,
airplane.
I was a broadcast journalism major, and I used to be on CBS radio when I was in college. And then I was on CBS radio for 14 years, doing 60-second educational uh, content for a CBS station in Philadelphia, actually the biggest talk station in the country. And so I did that for 14 years, 52 weeks of the year. So for me, I had a lot of practice in this. But for a lot of people, it doesn't come second nature to them. And I admire the fact that you've taken this on, and it's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it's very rewarding. And back at State College, I was a DJ at WKPS FM.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, but there was no live audience. Well, it's putting records on, but that was in 1998, 99, 2000. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, very cool. So let me bring up what you had mentioned a moment ago about helping entrepreneurs and having little wins compared to the home run. I know that one of the individuals that you interviewed on your podcast was Mark Harris, and he had worked with Mark Cuban, which again is Shark Tank, and this idea of putting one service or product out there and receiving those funds and when a bank can't. And I thought one of the things that, if I go back again to best practices, one of the topics the two of you spoke about was competing on the benefits to the customer compared to the price. Would you say more?
It's, well, look, at the end of the day, you can't succeed unless it's a benefit to your customer. If they don't see its value, and I've done a lot of startups, and uh, if somebody's not willing to pay for something that will positively impact them, then you don't have a business. Could be you think it's the greatest idea. People will tell you it's a problem that needs solving, but somebody won't pay for it. But at the end of the day, I think every entrepreneur looks to solve a problem and make a difference. I think very few entrepreneurs think about the money, that they hope the money will come, but they feel great satisfaction in developing something that will positively impact either companies or individuals or both.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a part of the mindset and the psychology that an entrepreneur has to think through, even if they're in survival mode of, oh, I need to get the return on investment.
I mean, I think everybody wants to make money, but at the end of the day, I mean, even when you do consulting, when your client says, oh, I'm so happy with the work you've done, you're on cloud nine. You just can't believe how happy you are because you know you've done a good job for somebody and that you've made a difference for them. So I think that goes throughout everything that we all get involved in, whatever that new venture is. If somebody uses it, or you've started the store and somebody's bought something for you, you feel good about that. It's really not about the money. You know you need the money to survive and take care of yourself, but it really is about making other people feel good about what you've done for them.
Yes, yes, it's a little piece of what I call heaven on earth.
Yeah.
Let me pivot for a moment to another best practice that I thought was really beneficial. So, to any of the listeners out there, I thought this was really a good distinction. And you talked about this idea. I think you had a friend who was a business journalist, and he or she knew better, and yet they went forward with an idea without fully testing the idea beyond their friends. And there's oftentimes entrepreneurs, again, who know better, but oftentimes they don't do that market research. They can fall in love with an idea, but they don't truly get a sense of market demand.
I have fallen into that. I mean, I developed a venture called Funding Organizer, and it's still up. It's a common app for commercial loan officers to collect information not in 4 to 8 weeks as they do now, but in one business day. And all these loan officers told me, "Oh my gosh, if you had something like that, that'd be great." So I worked with them, build it, and I couldn't get a bank to pay me to utilize this service. And so I think that any entrepreneur, when you're starting something, you need to get commitment from people who are willing to at least beta test your idea, but at a minimum, but hopefully they would be willing to test the idea with the idea that they were going to buy it. And if people say, "Oh my God, that's a great idea," okay, would you be willing to sign an agreement to buy this if it works out? I don't know. Because a lot of times people will tell you what they think you want to hear, or they want to be positive and not negative. And so you have to be careful about that. So you can do surveys. I once had a venture in the insurance area that every survey turned out to be amazing. And two big insurance companies invested in my idea because they did surveys too, and that product did not sell at all. And they were amazed, and we were all amazed about it. And that is not until you put something out there do you know if it will really sell or not. So you try to do all the market research, you try to talk to the customers, you try to get commitments. But at the end of the day, you've got to go launch it and see what happens. Sometimes you're pleasantly surprised and things kind of take off. I one time started a venture called PA Entrepreneurs. It was to teach PA artist entrepreneurs, was to teach artists how to be entrepreneurs. And I did it for the state of Pennsylvania. And they get, listen, if you have 500 artists in the first year that sign up to learn how to be entrepreneurs, that would be a home run for us. We put it out there, and the first month we had 2,200 artists that signed up.
Which is great. Yeah, because I think
Nobody,
something
we
like
never guessed it.
well,
Yeah,
90% of artists don't make money.
yeah. And this was to teach them. And the Secretary of Commerce at the time, Sam McCullough, thought it was a great idea, and he gave me $100,000 to launch it. And I did. But it turned out that the newspapers all over the world ended up covering this story, literally all over the world. And when I woke up the next morning thinking there might be 5 people using it, there were already 100 in the first hour. And by the
Oh,
end of
that's
the week, it was
lovely.
2,200. And I wondered, how could it be possible? And then I went online, typed in her name, and saw all these newspapers all over the world had published this story.
That's very nice because many artists are incredibly talented, but they live at the poverty level. And if they could just get those business skills, because art impacts humanity and society, whether it's product packaging, whether it's attending a gallery opening, whether it's, I mean, color of interior design. There's so much that art can be recognized for, and yet artists can oftentimes fall through the cracks.
Oh, oftentimes.
Yes. Do you still have that website, pitchtome.com?
Well, I have, well, that one we just talked about was paartistentrepreneur.com, but I have a service called pitchtomefirst.com.
Okay.
And people pay me to review their investor presentations. The whole reason I started is because I get so many requests to review people's investor presentations. And now I do them all over the world. I mean, I get calls from all over, and people send me their presentation. And that became a great side gig for me to make money. I mean, I run like 4 or 5 different ventures simultaneously. Like I got into the AI space, and I created with 2 students at Vin University, businessplanfactory.com. And you can type in one sentence idea, and you can go and create an entire business plan in 15 minutes with just one sentence. And so, Angelina, if you write to me, I will be glad to give you and your audience access for free to this tool as opposed to them paying. But it's a great tool that you can just spend one sentence and while you're watching a TV show, and come back 15 minutes later and you'll have a full business plan with the financial information you need to put together a spreadsheet.
That's lovely. I'm sure a listener will take you up on that offer. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, you can post it and we'll give you the information that you can send if they contact you.
Okay, wonderful. So for a fifth business practice, or fifth best business practice, either you could pick something that you think is important today, or you could tell me about the value of under promising and over delivering.
Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, we always want to under promise and over deliver. Nothing is worse than when somebody promises you something and doesn't keep up with it. So that's always critical for any business. I mean, even when you go to an airline, if they take the next level up, your kid is sitting next to you and they give that pin, or they just do something special for you, you didn't expect it. So that's great. If somebody is doing marketing strategy for you and they say it takes 4 weeks, in 2 weeks they have the first draft, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. So you're happy about that. But I think for entrepreneurs, one of the key things that you need to do is constantly be reading. I
Mm.
read about 5 to 7 different publications every week, and I'm always looking for new ideas. And I think without reading, your brain doesn't get kick-started for new ideas. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't read enough books or magazines. I mean, that's one of the beauties of running my podcast is I'm exposed to a different book every week, 52 books a year. So that's been very good for me in terms of generating ideas or fixing problems or understanding new opportunity.
Yeah, one of the authors that came onto your Best Business Minds podcast, she talked about Antarctica. And I thought, how wonderful. That really just pulls somebody out of their world to think about something new and different. So, out of curiosity, if you're constantly reading, what are you reading? Forbes, Harvard Business Review?
Yes, I love Harvard Business Review by far is my favorite publication. I think it's the best business publication you could read, and it's written in a way that anybody could understand it. It's not written in an academic way. So I think that's great. I read Inc. magazine, Fast Company, Forbes, Wall Street Journal. I read that religiously every day. I read Business Insider. I also go on Google and type in information I'm looking for things that I'm actually interested in. They send me stories, so I read those. So I probably spend on average about 3 hours a day reading. So I do a lot of reading. But I think it helps keep my mind intellectually engaged and creative.
Well, it's interesting. I think reading sometimes is a lost art regarding the next generations coming up.
Well, and I think so. I mean, people are listening to podcasts, which I think, of course, is great. But reading books like Malcolm Gladwell or Adam Grant or any of the authors, I just developed an award with the Best Business Minds, and we just named the 20 best business book authors. And I can't really tick them off. It's easier to send you the link and for you to send it out to your readers. But we just did it for the first year, and that's kind of a labor of love for me because I think that reading is so consequential to our success as individuals that if we're not reading, it makes it that much harder. And when I've interviewed CEOs, I've never interviewed a CEO who did not read.
Well, it's interesting. I think reading kind of works all these different parts of the brain. And if you're
Yes.
just watching the video about the book, it's not quite the same. It's like reading Jurassic Park compared to watching the movie.
Yeah. And just like when you write things down, right, you tend to remember them more than if you just listen to them. So, that's why writing things down, or if you're preparing for a test or a presentation, the more you write things down, the more embedded it is in your mind.
Which is interesting because I actually keep a paper planner on my desk and I have a notebook and it's I just noticed it's better if I physically write something compared to a Word document.
Yeah, I myself type everything because I can't read my own handwriting, which everybody who knows me can vouch for because I'll be like, what did I write there? I can't remember. So the only thing I can actually write in cursive is my signature, and even that is just lines.
Chicken scratch.
I wish it was chicken scratch. That would be a level above what I'm writing.
Very cool. Very cool. Since this is a legacy podcast, what does the word legacy mean to you personally?
Legacy means to me um, creating something that people benefit by, whether it's your family or the community at large or the world at large. You're leaving a legacy, and hopefully it's a positive legacy, right? There could be negative legacies, but usually when we hear the word legacy, we think of something positive. And so, what you're hoping that you do is that you lead a positive legacy. And it doesn't mean that you did have to change the world. Maybe your legacy is that you were just a great parent and were there for every ball game for your kids. And now your kids, like I do with my children, my dad was the best dad you could possibly imagine. So supportive, um, came to everything, uh, tried to be involved in a positive way in everything. Spoke to him every day when I was in college, and I was in West Virginia. He was in the Philadelphia area. So I think that's one way to leave a legacy. Another is to create something that everybody benefits from, or that you've taken your money and you've built a small park in your community, and now your legacy is all these kids can play at this park. So there's a variety of ways that you can do something positive for your family or for the community, but you don't want to disappear and be buried without having made your mark on your family or society. And that's what I focused my entire life on is how do I do that and make sure that I've made a contribution?
That's great reflection. That's thank you for being very concise and thoughtful. That's a deep answer that I think if anyone is listening to it, it can plant a seed, especially listeners that
Well,
are under age 40 that tune into this platform.
well, I mean, think about this. I do a lot of favors for people. And people say, "Oh my God, thank you so much for helping me." No, thank you for allowing me to help you because that made my day. I'm glad you benefited, but actually, it was a gift to myself that I was able to help you. And so that's how I look at it is anytime I can make a difference for somebody, helping them get an interview for a job, making a connection for them, whatever it is, that made me feel good. That made me feel that I added value today.
Is it
My being on this show makes me feel good.
good? Good. Is it the connection?
I just think in my particular case, I'm more servant leader. So
Mm.
I like to help people. So for me, going to sleep at night and knowing that I was helpful to you in your podcast, or that, like I wrote a recommendation for a student and she has a good chance of getting into graduate school, any of those things make me feel I've made a contribution. I like teaching because when I teach and the students say, "Oh my God, that was great," or "Thank you so much," even positive words, people don't realize that you can meet somebody and if they're down and you can say authentically something positive, that's really good. That's really something that they can carry with them. It could change their entire life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can speak blessing into other people's lives, and it not only is it the frequency, but it can absorb into their subconscious, and they take it with them, whether they are conscious of it or not. Yes,
Yes, of course.
yes. If you could think about 3 or 4 core values that influence you today, or that you would like to project forward regarding your personal legacy, what would those 3 or 4 values be?
I would think ethical, loyal, supportive, and uh, what's the right word that I'm looking for here? That you put other people first before yourself.
Altruistic?
You can be an altruist, but I'm thinking about when you are willing to go and do things without any benefit to you.
Oh,
So I think those
selfless.
are the four
Selfless?
core values I kind of live with.
Yes. Would you think of the word selfless?
Selfless, that's exactly the word I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it takes a generous person to be able to know that they are big enough that they can give of themselves without losing themselves.
Oh, yes, of course. I don't know if it's so big of them, but I kind of feel that at the end of the day, we all like to know that we did something positive. Most of us want to do something positive for our community and society. You know, the people who have the least give the most. The people who have the most give the least. It's kind of a weird thing. But when you talk to people who raise money for nonprofits, they tell you the people who can least afford it are the ones who are most generous. I think that's because they appreciate what they have. I think people who have a lot give it because they want to either have a legacy, which there's nothing wrong with that, or they want to see their name in a building because it's ego driven. But the people who don't have that and they still give, they give their time coaching kids, or they give their time setting up sets for community theater, or they're shoveling someone's, elderly person's house during a snowstorm without asking for any remuneration. All of those things are what makes uh, people great and add value to their community. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what you're hoping for.
And that's what also I think people remember when it gets quiet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, and what did you hear? There was a guy 20 years ago, I guess it is, or 15 years ago. I went to his funeral, and he was part of my synagogue, and I wasn't that big a fan of him, but I went to it, and there were 1,000 people that came to this guy's funeral. And my then wife and I were sitting there like, would you believe that this guy would have 1,000 people? I'm thinking maybe 100. And people got up and said all these wonderful things that he had done for them that nobody even knew he had done for them. And so that really said a lot about him, the kind of person that he was, that we didn't necessarily see it on the surface, but at the end of the day, he was a good person.
Yeah, that's magical. Those are the the silent decisions where someone doesn't need that pat on the back, and yet
Yes.
people remember. Yeah, it's powerful. Yeah.
Well, words are powerful. I mean, I one time coached a kid who was terrible in basketball, and I was coaching him on defense, and he accidentally, I mean, purely accidentally, stole the ball. I stopped play, called the timeout, told him what an amazing play that was, and talked about it. The other players were all slapping him on the back. He played at a much higher level after that. I mean, his whole game changed. He went from being below average to being above average just because we got excited about him accidentally stealing a ball.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I
That's a
mean, just
wonderful
think about,
story.
you see somebody who's doing artwork and you go, oh my God, it's beautiful. I mean, you really have a talent. Now all of a sudden they realize I actually have something. I actually have a talent. Because I would say 99% of us walk through life thinking we don't have any skills.
Well, I think what you did was you held up a positive mirror, and that's so beneficial because there's enough. When we talk about like this idea of like the metaphor of like the crabs in the bucket, there's enough
Yeah,
naysayers out there that'll like cause someone else to stumble. So it's an amazing gift to speak blessing into someone's life, but also to hold up that positive mirror and to look at them with new eyes. And then they, like you had said, they say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know I could see myself that way."
absolutely.
If you were to set aside a weekend or two a month for the next year to design a hardcover coffee table book, what would be in it?
Wow. Uh, Probably a combination um, of things that I do with my family, especially my two daughters, and what I do with my students at Penn University, because I say yes to everything. Really, I like any event they want to run that they need my support. I say yes to, and every one of them is gratifying. So I guess my tabletop book would have lots of pictures from Facebook because I put everything on Facebook. Today I was at an event that was a leadership boot camp and for our students, and it was amazing. And so I participated in the boot camp, and I got to speak and encourage the students and talked about how one of my students I saw him sitting at a table, and he looked very despondent. And I said, "Hey, are you just exhausted, or what's going on?" He goes, "Well, there were 12 teams, and we came in last, and I feel like a loser, and I let my team down, and I'm embarrassed." I said, "Did you quit on them? Did you not give your best effort?" "No, I gave my best effort. I didn't quit on them." "So did you learn anything from this?" "Well, yeah, I learned these things." "Okay, so tell me about the loser part." "Well, we didn't win." "Well, not everybody can win, or not today's your day. But if you told me that you didn't give your best effort, that you learned nothing, and that you wasted the day, well, yeah, then you're a loser. But if you did all these other things, then you came out a winner." So so you need to readjust your attitude about how you looked at things to realize that when people fail, especially really smart people, then they feel like they've let everybody down. And you see it in sports. You hear people who've lost and say, "I thought of committing suicide." Why? "Oh, well, because I'm embarrassed and I let everybody down." Well, that's just ridiculous. The only person you have to make happy is you at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, you just have to be in a constant state of learning. Bruce Lee, I thought this was amazing. I read this book about Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee, even when he lost, which was pretty rare, he would congratulate the other person, ask him to teach them what they did to him that he lost. And when he beat somebody, he would offer that person to teach them the move that he used to beat them. They would be like, "You would teach me that move?" Of course. We're all in the state of constant learning. So him losing did not faze him in the least. And I think people have to think of it in those terms, that life is just a series of learning lessons. And if you're not learning, well, then you're failing. But if you're constantly learning, well, then you're succeeding.
I think it's so important that you just spoke into that, given the suicide rate today of young people.
And we deal with that in school. We tell them, like, especially the high end schools like Penn and Harvard, where they have to teach them resiliency. You have to remind them that just because you're the smartest doesn't mean you're not going to fail. Just because everybody told you you're the smartest, so they put these unrealistic expectations on you, that you have to exceed those expectations. I've seen that happen plenty of times, where people are depressed because they've had a series of setbacks. Guess what? That's just the way it is. I remember the MMA star Ronda Rousey, after she got knocked out for the first time, she talked about that she thought about committing suicide. And you could tell the second time she came around, she still wasn't herself, because she had lost all her confidence. And everybody was telling her in that sport, "Guess what? You're going to lose." Everybody loses. It's pretty rare that somebody goes undefeated, just almost impossible to do. So that's life in general. It's just dusting yourself off, picking yourself up, and throwing yourself back in the fray.
And knowing that your identity is more than just wins.
Of course, I mean, your identity is many things, but I think, look, all of us, including myself, are tied up in what we do professionally. We can be the best parents, best partners, husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever that is. But if we're not successful professionally, then we're unfulfilled.
Interesting, interesting. I'm glad that you spoke into that, because again, there's a number of also very lucky individuals, and their company could go IPO, let's say in Silicon Valley, and then yet there's a small percentage of them that will give up.
Oh, it's total luck. I mean, the chances are of you being having an IPO, or even a multi-million-dollar company. Remember, there are 32 million businesses in the US, 28 million of them make less than $1 million. Only like 1% of them make more than, I think, 5 million. So think about that, what the odds are. The odds of you being the next Michael Jordan or
Tiger
Taylor
Woods,
Swift.
sure.
Incredible, incredible. But you just keep going out there and being the best you can be, and the chips will fall where they fall.
Yes. So let me reiterate for a moment. You would have photos in your hardcover coffee table book, views on mindset, anything else?
I guess it would be pictures of joy.
Mm.
You know, I think at the end of the day that most people take themselves too seriously, and they're not joyous over the small things. So today, I noticed in this event that I was at, where this boot camp, and we were telling the students, just enjoy the moment, because we're always skipping ahead. And I think that when you see pictures, I love Facebook because you look back and say, oh my gosh, what a great time, this trip I took, this party I was at, this meal I had. I think Facebook does a great service for people, that it reminds them to enjoy the small things and how many friends they do have. Or if they don't have many friends, reminding them to stop working so much and spend more time with friends or develop relationships.
Which is the meaning of life, or one of the meaningful joys of life. And yet it takes some courage to step beyond work, and to extend an olive
Well,
branch, and to.
I see young people, especially young CEOs, that spend all their time working on their venture. And I tell them, I'm 63 years old. Um, that venture, no matter what it is, uh, can't consume all of your time, because life goes by in a blink. And I mean, if you ask your dad, he's 77, and your dad will tell you, I was 21 like 2 seconds ago. I remember, he'll tell you, he remembers when he first held you, when you were first born. And he's like, what happened to the time? That's the one question thing we all say as we get older is, what happened to the time? And you don't want to be looking back and wondering, what if? I mean, I decided to take this job at Vin Uni. Everybody goes, oh my God, you're going to move all the way to Vietnam? Yeah, because life's too short. I want to experience things. I've jumped out of airplanes, I've flown helicopters, because I don't want to leave anything on the table.
And life's an adventure. Very cool. Very cool.
It always is. And you have no control over what the outcome is going to be, positive or negative.
Yes. Before I read my closing paragraph, I just wanted to say thank you for being a guest today and speaking into legacy, holistic legacy planning, in the idea of how we live today, whether it's the 5 best business practices that you spoke into, the 4 values of loyalty, ethics, being supportive, being selfless, or even just the idea of taking the thought leadership to put together a hardcover coffee table book. Are there any final thoughts you would like to share?
I know I just would say this, that every morning you wake up as a new day, and it gives you another chance to maximize your life experience. So don't put things off. I've written 6 books, and I have friends who haven't written one book, and they keep talking about the same book year after year, or they talk about the trip that they're going to take, or they talk about that they're going to do this thing with their kids, and they put it off. Don't put off anything, because tomorrow might be the last day that you ever had a chance to do it. So live life to the fullest every single day, because it just goes by too fast.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Well, I'm going to read out the closing paragraph. Unless there's a website you would like to share of one of your businesses, or.
Well, I think anybody would enjoy the 2 podcasts I host, which is The Best Business Minds, where I interview business book authors, and Asian Founders and Funders, which is mostly me interviewing amazing Asian entrepreneurs here in Vietnam and throughout Asia, because nothing like listening to an entrepreneur talk about their story. I mean, I have a student who came from nothing, couldn't afford English lessons, went online and taught herself how to program, and created a AI program that taught her how to speak English, and she speaks it flawlessly.
That is so cool, because it takes tremendous courage. I know when my mother came to America from South Korea, it takes tremendous courage to learn another language. It's I mean, it's the pronunciation, it's the different meanings, it's so much in terms of nuance comes into that. Okay, so I'm going to read my closing paragraph. Thank you so much, Marc, for being a guest.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're tuning in on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, SoundCloud, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends, or if you're watching on YouTube, again, add a comment and let us know your thoughts. So thank you so much for joining us this week, and thank you, Marc, for speaking into your legacy.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.